transition has accelerated worldwide, but often the renewable energy generated cannot be delivered to consumers, as electricity grids are not sufficiently developed. And the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. As other sectors go the route of electrification, especially transportation, electricity consumption will rise sharply. Well-developed grids also offer security against power outages and enable greater energy independence. Joining me for this last high-level panel today are Tina van der Straete, Belgium's Minister for Energy, Viktor Parlikov, the Minister of Energy of the Republic of Moldova, and Stephanie Batier, the Director of Communication of the Renewables Grid Initiative. Thank you so much for joining me today. Panelists, before I get to questions for you, I'd like to start off with a Slido question for those of you in the audience today. As always, you can scan that QR code there on either side of the screens. And this is the question for this last panel today. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the electricity grids of the future? Make sure you choose Europazaal and answer this question. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of electricity grids of the future? We will look at those results in just a little bit, but right now, while the responses are coming in, I'd like to turn to my panelists for our first round of targeted questions. I'd like to start with you, Minister van der Straete. Now, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has greatly accelerated the construction of interconnectors, particularly in Europe, and you're planning more in Belgium. What's the primary aim of this cross-border expansion? Let me check and see. Can you talk into one more time? Yes. I think the microphone might not be on. Let's just see if it's turned on. Try it now.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
The female touch. The primary aim of interconnections is energy resilience. We have this awful moment when Putin announced this large-scale invasion of Ukraine. It was at the moment that Ukraine was in island mode with its grid. It was the 24 winter test, and they were completely disconnected from Russia. And then what happened? The European TSOs all got together with some guidance from energy ministers and the Energy Commission, and they reconnected, not to Russia, but to the European grid. And this was a major achievement by our TSOs. And it is one of the examples how infrastructure has saved us, has us more independent and more resilient. And this is now what we need to become furthermore independent. We have this huge energy potential that we hold in the sea basins across the European Union. And if we can tap into this potential, we can become more independent. We can build offshore wind turbines in the different seas, also make hydrogen out of it. We can supply to our own households, to our own industries within Europe, but also to countries who are bordering us and who are hopefully in a soon future coming to join us within the European Union. So this is a whole interconnection is about security, independence, and also economic welfare.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'd like to go right next to your colleague next to you because you brought it up. Up until very recently, you were obtained most of your electricity from a gas-fired power plant in Transnistria. But now, as your colleague said, you're connected to the European electricity grid. And I want to ask, in what direction will your electricity grid have to change even more in the future?
Very good question. Thank you very much. In fact, I think Moldova is worth becoming a study case for how the electricity interconnections and particularly the synchronization that has happened in very emergency mode in 2022 affects much more than just the energy. For us, it meant not just energy security, for us it meant also the country's reintegration, because the whole leverage, Russia was using for many years energy infrastructure and gas, operationalizing it as a weapon, weaponizing it. Now, with the synchronization of the grids in 2022, Russia lost the last instrument of blackmail of Moldova through the infrastructure that was, even in the Soviet times, placed in the Transnistrian region, which is becoming a breakaway region. Now, but this is different. This is more to the discussion of the interconnections and the strategic importance of these interconnections for security. In our case, just building on what my colleague mentioned, we are envisaging becoming part of the European energy market even before we become a member country of the EU, particularly due to these interconnections and the fact that with more interconnections we will be able to couple the Moldovan energy market through the Romanian market, become part of the European market. I think the realistic term for it, the realistic deadline for it is 2029. Which is pretty soon already if we take into account the planning and the implementation terms in energy. Now, what will need to change in the view of renewables? Well, what I like to say is that engineers got it all. It's not an engineering problem. It's not a problem of integrating or finding technical solutions to how to integrate renewables, variability, storage, etc. It's not about engineering. All these solutions are there. Virtual power plants, demand-side management, all these fancy stuff is there. It's technically working. You can see it, you can touch it, you can work it. The problem, realistically speaking, is on our side as policymakers, is the organization of the markets, is the regulation, and is the financing. And the financing has been touched hundreds of times during the discussions today, and it's probably another opportunity to mention it again. Fundamentally, renewable energy is actually cheaper than fossil, simply because it doesn't require any or very little OPEX. The CAPEX is the problem. And if you have the right structure of financing, if this financing is de-risked, then your cost of energy is basically your CAPEX. And with that, the price of renewable energy can outbeat almost any type of energy. Today, if we are comparing feasibility of energy projects with even for the balancing, I would actually compare the cost of energy coming from any balancing energy to the cost of cheap solar or cheap wind coupled with electricity storage on the medium term. Because I think that the future, the further we will go, the more we will see feasibility cases, better feasibility cases, coupled with cheap renewable, with storage. Now, what does it mean for the grids? For the grids, it means only one thing. It's if you have the regulatory incentives and the market functioning, if the financing is available, then the solutions will come. And we see it everywhere. We see it in developed markets, particularly with very, very diverse type of markets in the US. We are already seeing it, 20-something% of the balancing coming from the demand-side management, coming from the virtual power plants. It's already a reality. And again, it's not a technical problem, it's a regulatory and financial challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viktor Parlikov. Speaking of markets, Stephanie Betier, I want to come to you now. The renewables grid, among other things, looks at making sure that energy grid expansion remains competitive on the market. In German, we talk about being wettbewerbsfähig. What role do renewable energies play in this context in making sure that grid expansion is also competitive?
Sorry, I turned it off. Thanks a lot. Well, I think that we actually, in this context, in the context of competitiveness, also need to talk about the narratives that we've built around this. We've heard a lot from the two ministers here on the panel of the enabling power of grids. And I think this is something that should be reflected in the way that we talk about grids as well. It's hugely important that these enabling powers are actually something that is like broadly perceived in connection with grids as well. We always talk about, or at least I read in media, I hear in media about the problems with grid integration, the costs that are connected with building out grids. But you mentioned competitiveness. You mentioned the role, the positive role of renewables. And this is something that we actually need to highlight in our narratives around grids, around renewables, around the energy transition. So grids play a huge role in the context of competitiveness. We've heard from the Moldovan minister that actually all the technical solutions that we need are already there. And that's of course true, but there are always things that we can improve as well. There are things we can make better. Therein lies a huge potential to actually create new businesses. There's a huge potential for clean tech innovation in there. This is a benefit for all of Europe if we tap into that. We're currently a green technology leader, and this is something that we can build on, and that is hugely important going forward. So competitiveness is something that in terms of the chances that lie in it for Europe is a huge topic in connection with grids and with renewables. And there are so many other enabling factors in that. We heard about energy security, we heard about energy independence. We can just go on a much easier to understand level and say grids and renewables going forward will be what enables our lives as we know them. It's what keeps the lights on. It's what we need as a baseline to have a stable economy, to keep our businesses growing. So coming back to the way that I started my intervention, talking about the narratives that we need. I think this is a mindset switch that is needed there in terms of the way that we talk about the energy transition, that we talk about grids, renewables, and everything that they bring beyond just the energy transition, which of course is extremely important, but there's so much more that we can.
I'm so happy to see you raising your microphone. Please, I'd love for you to respond.
Yes, with regard to the narrative, I do agree, but I also think that we should avoid too technical details, because as energy professionals, we are very happy if it can talk about cables and pipelines and how that these should be able to dispatch load and not generation and so on and so on. But this is a narrative that I think will not conquer hearts and minds of people. And that in terms of narratives, that we have to give examples that are known to everyone. For example, the fact that the European Union was built on a coalition for a community for coal and steel. Why? To have economic welfare for our industries. And in order to have that, we built infrastructure. The example from Ukraine, the fact that the Ukraine grid was in island mode, reconnected to the European grid, kept the lights on. Russia bombed everything to take the light out, but they could count on us. The fact that we in Belgium have an LNG terminal that was able to have gas flow into Germany helped the European economy as a whole. So we have to speak in specific examples, because we have a very difficult thing that we have to bridge in communication, is that grid investments need upfront money. And we sell these projects with something that will be better in the future. But we need to convince people that if we spend all this money now, it will be better tomorrow. And so that's why in narratives, it should not be an energy technical nitty-gritty narrative, but on what it really is about. Examples from the past, but also from recent months. And then we can tell a story of action and a story of hope.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant, actually. That we need to tell stories that connect to people's living realities, that connect to what people know and what policy priorities beyond the energy transition are. So, yeah.
Minister from Moldova, I do want to give you a chance to respond because I see you nodding, and this is much more exciting, I have to say, also as a moderator. Please.
No, look, in Moldova, in one way, we're blessed. We're blessed that the transmission grid is not a constraint. The transmission grid is robust enough to absorb even a potential full electrification of transport. But there's a lot of things that need to happen at the level of distribution grids. And there's a lot of things that need to happen in terms of integrating communications, IoT. And that will mean that we will have to separate or to have a separate big discussion, not just discussion, but take actions and costs, assume costs on cybersecurity. Because the further we move into the digitalization, the further we move into IoTs, the further we move into automating things, the more vulnerable we become to potential software and malign action on that respect. And that is a cost, but the benefits of having it are, at least in my understanding and estimation of costs and values, is definitely there's more value and there's more advantages associated with this transfer than the cost that we will need to assume.
Thank you so much, Viktor Parlikov. I have a question I want to ask you, but please.
I wanted to build on that topic. Viktor, you speak, of course, from your own context on cybersecurity and also the threat that you still have from Russia being at the border of the European Union. But this is an argument that is also more general. For example, I talked in the beginning about tapping into the potential that the seas hold. For example, with regard to offshore wind, we have huge capacities of offshore wind that we can deploy in the different seas of the European Union. We have a major offshore wind strategy. If all these wind turbines are manufactured outside Europe, but I mean, of course, in China. And if China has a hold also on transformers and so on, we also have a risk there. So also to fight against cybersecurity, you have a secure system also from that perspective. It's also very important that we have local, as in European, or among, let's say, blocks of friends, supply chains, value chains, so that we can count on each other and not become dependent yet again on a nation, a country, that in the end can just say, okay, you were nice for the time being, but now I'm doing something else. And so this is a major issue. And so as energy ministers, we are not only energy ministers anymore, but security ministers. We are doing economic policy. It brings everything together.
Thank you so much. When you talk about acting as Europeans, I want to pivot for a moment to the EU Action Plan for Grids. If we could have a couple of questions about that. I'd like to start with you, Stephanie Baetier. So in order to expand renewables, we need to rapidly also expand grids. We've heard there are going to be some challenges. Which of these challenges that we've already talked about or others that we haven't yet mentioned are going to be addressed by the EU Action Plan for Grids?
So some of the most important things in connection with the EU Action Plan for Grids are that we start working more on implementation. We have a lot of policies connected to infrastructure, to energy, to climate. We need to bring all of those together, and in the context of the Action Plan for Grids and energy infrastructure, look at how can we implement this as fast as possible, and also with a view to being nature and people positive in the way that we approach this. That's the one thing. So implementation, I think, #1 priority. So we can talk a lot, and that's important, and it's important that we discuss more but we need to focus on doing stuff. We also need to focus on bringing electrification forward. It's the most resource efficient, the most cost efficient way of decarbonizing, and it's the best way of actually empowering citizens in the context of the energy transition as well. So in my opinion, we need an action plan also for electrification. So I'm slightly going back on, we don't just need policy, but I do think in the context of electrification, it's important that we set ourselves a specific target for this as well, which, according to the Renewables Grid Initiative, is a 35% electrification target by 2030. That should be enshrined in such an electrification action plan. In addition to that, we need to, with a specific view to grids, and the Belgian minister mentioned this already, look at anticipatory investments. We talked about financing a bit. So this is a crucial pillar of the EU Action Plan for Grids. Anticipatory investments will be what allow us to accelerate the deployment of renewables going forward, so hugely important. And then maybe a fourth point on, better integrated planning for grids going forward. When it comes to integrated planning between national and EU level, when it comes to integrated planning between energy system modeling and spatial planning, or energy system planning and spatial planning, and when it comes to integrated planning between the different voltage levels that we look at. All of this has a collaborative aspect. All of this will help us with figuring out the multitude of needs that are connected to things that we've also mentioned before. Demand response, storage, missing one point now, but so this will be hugely important going forward and will help us figure out a lot.
Thank you so much, Stephanie Baetier. I'd like to come to you because I have a question for you also about the EU Action Plan for Grids, because in addition to being a minister, you are also a lawyer for the environment and energy law. For environmental and energy law. How do you see the chances of success for the EU plan for grids, the EU Action Plan for Grids? Is it going to really speed up the lengthy expansion of electricity grids?
If you have a strong presidency, yes. The time is now. The time is absolutely now. And we have discussed during 18 months among energy ministers the one emergency measure after the other. But the basic tagline in all our conversations on emergency measures was how to build for a better and resilient future. And it is something that is shared among the 27 of us. And so Commission has now come up indeed with this grid action plan. And as a presidency, we are now working on a shared view among the 27 of us, where indeed the most urgent priorities lie. I like very much what you said, electricity. Let's not forget electricity first. I am a little bit worried that in our hydrogen narratives that we use, and I will say beforehand, I put a little disclaimer that I am a hydrogen believer. I come from Belgium. We have a large manufacturing industry with an existing hydrogen demand, and there are hard-to-abate sectors present in Belgium, like steelmaking, life sciences, and so on. But in order to have hydrogen, you have to have electricity first. And so let's build out renewable electricity in the different sea basins that we have, connect this to the grid, and the hydrogen will follow. The hydrogen will follow. But the whole hydrogen narrative has today also the risk that electricity projects got delayed. And then it will be a double loss for Europe, because we need absolutely this electricity to heat our homes, to drive our cars. So I will take it with me to have I don't know if I have a lot of consensus around the table to have yet more targets on the table, but the idea, I think, is something that is really, really, really important. Electrification first, and then molecules they will follow automatically. Because if we build out electricity infrastructure, we will have excess capacity that we can turn into molecules to be used in our manufacturing industries or to balance the grid if necessary, to store maybe seasonal storage and so on. So most important thing is integrated planning, 1 gigawatt at a time, consistently. And then at the same time look for de-risking tools with regards to financing, and also a regional approach. We at different regions within Europe, the beauty of the regional format is that like-minded people with the same context meet, and that in this regional format, it's not EU countries alone. North Sea countries, we have Norway and UK with us. In the CESEC format, which is the Central Eastern South community, Moldova, for example, the countries of the energy community are in it. And so that is the way in which we will build an integrated European energy network that is larger than European Union alone. And I will be very happy to welcome you in the energy network, and then we can afterwards celebrate the accession of Moldova to the European Union.
Thank you very much.
But energy will go quicker, I think, than membership.
Yes.
It will help with the membership also.
Because energy integration and markets integration is more the work of lawyers, economists, and engineers, whereas political integration is a different story.
The moderator has lost.
No, I have to say it's unfortunate because this is actually quite a very fascinating panel. I think that grids are so critical. I mean, everything that we discuss at the BETD is critical, but this is something, and I hate to say this because we have to start wrapping things up. So I want to ask, I have to look through my questions that I have, and I have to think, okay, if I'll address it to each of you. If you can think of the most critical thing to make grids secure, resilient for the future, what is the most critical thing that we need to do? Tina von der Straate, you get to have the first word.
Oh, no.
I'll probably say cybersecurity is now at least the link that is less explored probably than it really requires attention. I mean, I think we will hit problems more on this side than on the other side.
Thank you so much, Viktor Parlikov. I'd like to, please, yes, Tina von der Straate.
I was hesitating because there are so many technical things that I can say, but I will take another perspective. I think the most critical thing is political commitment to make it work. And so that means stepping out of the purely economical business cases, that we have to take into account what is the value of independence, what is the value of security, what is the value of addressing climate change, and put that into the thinking. Because all of these projects that we have been discussing from a purely financial perspective, they are all negative, because they don't account for the right things to do. And at one point in time, now, in fact, we have to have an honest conversation also between us, which are the main projects that we are going to realize anyway, because they are needed for security from an economic, from a climate, and from a security perspective. And so that also means that as ministers from individual countries, we need to take a step back, sit around the table and talk in a broader perspective. That can be a regional one, a European one, I think both of them combined, and to say we make it work and we are willing to take into account a larger context than the national one alone.
Thank you so much. Stephanie Betier for our final word today.
Yes, I can only agree with the two speakers before me. These are hugely, crucially important things. I'm not a security or a technical expert, so if you allow me, I'll slightly deviate from the question and say that even if we build the grid infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that we need for a largely renewables-based energy system, there will be no net zero in the end if we don't look at biodiversity, if we don't look at nature, and if we don't plan the energy transition in a way that we bring people along. We talked a bit about narratives already, so I want to talk about nature a bit. There are, as with the technical solutions, a lot of solutions already, how we can build the grid in a way that is nature positive, that actually when we deploy a grid project, we end up with a net positive for nature. There are integrated vegetation management solutions. There are solutions offshore. A lot that we have on the table, so we actually need to look at how can we implement that broadly. So I don't think we need to always do that in the vicinity of a specific project, but we can look at the bigger picture. Where do restoration measures make the biggest difference for biodiversity on a big scale? And talking about like the bigger scale, the bigger picture, this is something that, and I've touched about on spatial planning before, that needs to be integrated in a meaningful way in spatial planning going forward. So we talk a lot about acceleration and about potentially in the context of that reducing environmental assessment in connection with specific grid projects, which I think is a possibility going forward, but it's only a possibility if we do the work now and if we actually do a lot of like detailed environmental data collection and create sensitivity mapping, broad sensitivity mapping for every country, but also for sea basins offshore. So we need a sea basin approach when we're looking at offshore. Like all of these things can help us build the grid so much quicker if we do the work now with regard to nature, and then we can be a lot quicker going forward.
I know that time is up. I know. But I wanted, nevertheless, fully, 100% what you are saying, and I'm happy that you deviated from the question to bring indeed nature into the question. I think none of the 27 ministers at EU level is wanting to go to this painful process of nature restoration law again. So that means that we need to avoid it. And specifically, and we need to learn what happened on land. What we did on land is what brought us in this painful process of the nature restoration law. So we need to avoid it at sea. And that's why we are building in Belgium these hybrid energy islands. It's a world first and so on. But we did it in a nature-inclusive way. In fact, we changed the design, because when we first were thinking about, okay, we're going to build a hybrid infrastructure and it's going to be an island, and then we can say we are the first country to do so, it was, in the beginning, business as usual. What are potential effects on nature and how can we mitigate? But then when we were already there, the engineers were very angry with me, because I said, no, we have to change our thinking and indeed think, how can this island infrastructure work for and with nature to have a net positive impact? And so that's why we are now doing oyster lines and gravel beds and so on and so on and so on. And why is that important? Specifically because we are the first ones building the island. So we have to show for all the other offshore infrastructure that are going to come that yes, it can be done. It can be done. We have the technology, and what's even better, that probably because we are the first, we will not be the best, so that they can learn from our mistakes and outcompete us and come with even better things. And then indeed we can avoid the disaster at sea, what we have seen now happening on land. So thank you for your comment on nature.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Tina van der Straete, Viktor Parlikov, and Stephanie Betier. This was a really fabulous panel. Audience, I'd love to give them a great round of applause for a fantastic end of the day.